This video was made at the request of Zwervich. I'm sorry, pal, I have no clue how to say your name. We have two versions of Jacque de Molay in Fate Grand Order, one of which explores the end of their life in an interesting way, and the other one has a penis. So sit back and let me explain why Molay is better as a woman. Jacque de Molay was the 23rd and final Grand Master of the Knights Templar, a Christian military order that operated between 1119 and 1312. The group's primary mission was to protect Christians taking a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but they also acted in defense of the Crusader states and took part in the Crusades themselves. They were both extremely popular and incredibly pervasive throughout Christendom. Strangely enough, though, they also acted as a bank, letting pilgrims deposit their wealth with local Templars, who would give them documentation that allowed them to withdraw an equal amount of treasure at the Holy Land. If you ever wondered why both Molay seem strangely concerned with money, that's why. As interesting as it is, though, most of the Templars' activities aren't particularly relevant to the designs of these two. For their story, we must fast forward to the fall of the Order. Over its life, it saw repeated military failures that led to the loss of much of their holdings and influence. Molay himself could be said to have failed to achieve anything of note. To add to their troubles, many European nobles began to view the Order with fear due to their pervasiveness. Taking advantage of this, King Philip IV of France took advantage of heretical rumors to arrest them on Friday the 13th, October 1307, binding both versions to the superstitions associated with the day. The charges included the worship of a being known as Baphomet, commonly depicted as a man with a goat head. Consequently, the order was abolished and Molay was sentenced to death. It's said that on his execution pyre, Jacque de Molay cursed Philip IV and Pope Clement V, saying that within a year they'd be answering for their crimes in the presence of God. Which might be one of the most metal things a Christian man has ever said. And spookily enough, both men did end up dying within the year as well, so maybe there was something to the curse. And that is all for the relevant history of Jacque de Molay. So how well does his design reference it? For the Saber version, they keep things simple, keeping strictly to a Templar template. His black and white gambeson not only makes for a striking design, but also references a flag used by his order. I couldn't find any record of the Templars using this kind of armor, but the design decision could be influenced by the vows of the order. As his own skill puts it, death rather than surrender, poverty, chastity, and obedience. The sacred oath of the Knights Templar, which a young Molay took to hope in his heart and never forgot as he lived. As a gambeson would be cheaper than mail armor, it would fulfill the poverty part of the vow. Whether or not that was the intention, it goes far in making him visually distinct from other knight servants. While it may seem strange that the cross emblazoned on him is black rather than the signature red of the order, Molay has been depicted as having a black cross on his robes, making this depiction oddly accurate. Speaking of crosses though, we can see that the guard on his sword as well as the pouches on his hip also bear the symbol, because I guess the giant black one wasn't telling enough. He is also loaded with pointless straps, which attempt to keep the design asymmetrical and therefore more visually interesting, but I think in practice it just makes it look a little too busy, especially when the design already has enough elements to draw in the eye, such as the black arm and exposed leg. The hood surrounding his head calls attention to the fact that Molay looks withdrawn, like a man who generally keeps to himself. This contrasts well with his glasses and his glare, which convey a focus and strength you'd expect from a commander. He also has this little yellow tag that we'll take a closer look at in his final ascension. I generally don't like knight designs, it's not really an aesthetic I vibe with, but I must admit that while simple, I think this one is one of the better ones. Although this explanation is a little front-loaded because ascensions don't really add much to the design. The second art switches his white glove and boots for metallic black armor. That, while making him look a little sturdier and menacing, looks a little clunky. Pauldrons and added straps in particular really weighs the design down in my opinion. His arm just has too damn much going on, and to be honest, it's kind of an eyesore for me. And the random barcode on the top one does not help. Man looks like he just bought a costume piece from the nearby supermarket and less like a grandmaster gearing up for battle. On the bright side, his sword and shield both get improvements here, getting more ornamental to sell Molay as greater than your average knight. But the third art gets a bit more carried away with his pauldrons, making the top one look bulkier with a spiked cross design, which at the very least makes it a bit more interesting to look at. It'd still be a better look without all those straps cluttering the area, but at least this is a small improvement. And once again, the sword and shield get beefed up a little bit. Now both of them sport cross-like designs all over, to the point they look more symbolic than practical, which is a fine thing for a servant design. Perhaps most striking though is that he's thrown back his hood, revealing his eye-catching gray hair. A visual point well used by both versions of him. And perhaps not as noticeable is the way his skin tone has become a little grayer, making him look not quite right and playing into the rumors of the Templar Knights by making him look just a little bit sinister. And before looking at the final ascension, I'd like to point out what I believe is a major missed opportunity for the design. I'd have preferred it if the design of his sword and shield in the third art was actually switched with that in the first. I understand that ascensions generally focus on making the servant look more powerful, but I think it'd be a cool way of representing the decline of the Templars by showing the Grand Master himself losing these grandiose symbols of his faith and status. It'd at the very least be more impactful than the normal steady growth the design shows now. The final ascension really doesn't do much other than stick Molay into a cool pose while he is thinking on something. I don't believe this is depicting any particular moment either. Something is burning in the background, but it isn't exactly clear what. The only real thing of note is we get an up-close look of the yellow tag here, which depicts a cartoonish goat on. This small little detail is the main visual connection between him and Baphomet, who he was accused of worshipping. Except it's not quite so simple. Connections are a powerful thing in the Nasuverse, and another entity connected to black goats is brought into the fray. From Lovecraftian mythos is Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. Their main contribution to fate? Gender-bending Molay. Yep, this outer goddess is the perpetrator behind female Molay, only playing second fiddle to capitalism. But before I go on, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe if you've been enjoying so far. My current goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers by June, and every little bit helps. Thanks, now let's get on with it. So why does only one of the Molays seem to be affected by this eldritch being? The difference here is simple. The foreigner Molay has been corrupted by the scandals and stigma that surrounded the Order, and that corruption was further fueled by Shub-Niggurath to create the Molay we see in this game. That key difference also clues us into how their designs differ, though it's not readily apparent how. As a foreigner, she stands before a great tower, and her color scheme has been flipped, with black taking the focus with some white to add variety. The outfit isn't meant for fighting at all either. Rather than padded armor, she sports a long and tight robe that highlights her figure and pulls at her feet. In fact, the only place we can see anything padded is the white jacket she wears, which only serves to make her design look a bit more fashionable. The black cross is still displayed across the chest here, though I'd prefer it be white for the sake of adding to the idea of inversion, but it's a small thing. In a small way, she keeps the yellow strap that bound them to the black goat with the belts around her hips and sword. And to the side, you can see a black goat that's always accompanying her. Not only does it make her stick out a little bit more, but it'll also act as a symbol of her corruption. And strangely, she has this odd black cloth writhing around her, with a strange metal tip at the end. While I can't say with certainty, it's possible it's a reference to the Shroud of Turin, which is said to have been the burial shroud of Jesus. Rumor of it actually having been the Shroud of Molay exists, though, a tidbit we see through her skill Holy Shroud fake. But seeing the path this thing takes to the Ascensions makes that unlikely. What doesn't change, though, is the gray hair and glasses, which ends up being the main thing visually binding the designs together. Overall, it's not a huge departure from her Saber counterpart, remaining similar enough to visually read as an inversion of his design, right down to the fact that they are facing different directions. Her second art, though, moves away from this idea of inversion, instead focusing on the idea of corruption, which for her represents liberation and endless pleasure, a departure from the vow of the Knights Templar. She starts by liberating herself from most of her clothes. Her legs and thighs are exposed now, along with her heels, which serve to boost the sex appeal of the design. The cross on her chest has now been removed, both to represent her departure from her order and to display what she has become, a hedonist dedicated to the corruption of humanity. I never expected to have to explain why a boob window is a key element to telling a story, but life surprises you sometimes. Continuing the theme of corruption, her jacket is now black, and her little goat, he stands now. I don't like it. Also, his eyes are red, which is never a good sign. Last, and definitely least though, that metal floating bit behind her is now spiky, mostly to make it similar in shape to her third art, where it becomes... Oh god, what is that? We now see its true form, a wriggling spiked tentacle filled with these strange balls and a singular sheep. Also, she's basically a monster girl now, so guess I'm done for. In all seriousness though, I assume that tentacle thing is what I'll refer to as an eldritch womb, with the balls inside it being eggs, bringing it in line with Shub-Niggurath's title as the goat with 1,000 young. Although if someone more well-versed on Lovecraftian mythos wants to correct me, that would be greatly appreciated. Shifting back to Molay herself though, we see her skin has become dark gray and that she's removed her jacket and removed even more clothing. She is at her freest here, and she is dialing the temptress angle even further. Her expressionless face now has a seductive smile, and her piercing yellow eyes have narrowed, staring straight at the viewer. And I'm sure that the exposed shoulder and the choker around her neck is also doing things for some of you. Also notable, the cloth between her legs and over her breasts now have pink strips running over them, drawing the eyes in. She is gladly putting herself on full display, both for her own fun and for the sake of corrupting humanity. It also plays up a more traditional witch angle, with the cow skulls hanging from her and the horns sprouting from her head. Her hands now reveal glowing bones just beneath the skin, and strange wings that share that glow spread out behind her, and act as one of the only parts of the design I actually dislike. Like the Saber version's pauldrons, I think they're an unneeded addition that clutters the design. What doesn't clutter the design, though, is the tail-like appendage snaking around her and sinking into the inky ground beneath her. She has a retinue of devilish iconography to sell the sinister vibes of the picture. The small spikes hanging from her waist have grown into glowing red instruments of torture that serve only to bring pain, and her sword has elongated, and just for a little bit of that extra eldritch seasoning, it is all eyes. And the little goat has a glassy, now deformed head with star patterns inside of it. And one fun detail is that its body looks like it's made of the same material that her jacket was. The final ascension, much like the Saber version, looks nice, but doesn't add anything to the design. But it does make it a little easier to see what I consider the absolute worst part of the design, being the white shape on her skin. Most prominently seen in her noble phantasm, Molay has the cross returned to her design for the final ascension, which leaves me asking, why? Is the idea that it's heretical because it's on her corrupted form? Possibly, but more than anything, it feels like the strangest kind of backpedaling to me, and it muddles the story of the design here. Overall though, while her design is conceptually simple, it takes the idea of the demonic temptress and plays it to the absolute extreme, making a woman who looks suitably wicked and sexy. And it does a good job gradually revealing her corrupted form. I also like the way that it slowly adds to the sex appeal. So then, our final question is, which one is better? The strong knight who holds his beliefs until his dying breath? Or the woman corrupted by lies and rumors spread after her wrongful execution? While I had a definitive answer for myself at the start, now I have to say, it's both. While I personally prefer Foreigner Molay because I think not only is the storytelling there more interesting, but I have to admit, I am not above liking something because of sex appeal. But speaking rationally, I think both designs competently say what they want to and convey the characters well. I totally understand why some people love the Saber design and want him in Fate Go. Personally, I actually kinda want to see both designs swapped at some point. Seeing the Lady Grandmaster Knight and a corrupted horny man would be wild to see. No matter which version you prefer, both are pretty fantastic actually. So, thank you for listening to my insane ramblings. If you enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe, it is very much appreciated, and see you next time!